I created this really cool lathe simulation in Blender using geometry nodes. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you just how to make it. This uses the new feedback loop technique in geometry nodes. To create that, start by duplicating your default cube. Name your first cube Cutter, and the second one Loop. Go to the Geometry Nodes tab, and we won't need the spreadsheet. On the Cutter object, add a new Geometry Nodes, name it Cutter. On the Loop, add a new Geometry Nodes and name it Loop. By the way, make sure you're in Blender 3.4 beta or Blender 3.1. This does not work in Blender 3.3. Okay, now on the Loop object, drag in the Cutter object from the outliner. Switch it to relative and plug it into the output. This just takes the cutter geometry and simply outputs it as its own geometry. Super simple. You can hide the loop object now. On the cutter object, drag in the loop object. Set it to relative, add a join node, and plug it in. You need to make sure that it is the lower one in the join node. It needs to be the bottom input for this to work. Now, if you move the cutter object, you'll leave a trail of cubes. Flower Z to undo that. And now we need a way to control that, so add in a switch node and plug that in there. A scene time, compare, so when the frame equals 1, it will use the cube by itself. When it's any other frame, you'll see your simulation. This is a really great way to just reset the simulation. For example, I'm on frame 1, I move this around, nothing. If I go to any other frame, it does this. Simply just go back to frame 1 to reset. Extremely useful. I'll just clear the position. Now, in edit mode, make the cutter object smaller and longer. And it is time to make the wood object. So move this over like this. Add in a plane. This will be the wood. Scale it on the y-axis in edit mode. Put an edge loop in the middle and delete this half of it. Maybe make it a little wider this way. And move this over again. Okay, name the new object wood. Go back to the geometry node tabs. Give it a new geometry nodes. Name that wood. And in here, all we need is a mesh boolean to start. And just drag in the cutter. Switch to relative. Plug it into mesh 2. Now let me go to frame 2. Move this around. You see it breaks it. And the only way I could fix that problem was to create a remesh of the tool object, the cutter object. So to do that, add another cube and name it remesh. And let's see. New geometry nodes, name it remesh. So delete that, drag in the cutter, set to relative, already have it. So this object simply reflects the cutter object. It shows the exact same thing. I call this a ghost object. It lets you do stuff to an object without actually doing things to an object. So now on this remesh object, make sure it's selected, add a remesh modifier. That realize instances. Those you might not need this, but if you do, then it's there. Add a remesh modifier, and just leave the settings as are. Turn on smooth shading, and you can hide the remesh object now, or just leave it showing, whatever. Okay, now on the wood object, instead of the cutter, choose the remesh. Now when you move this around, let me go to a different frame, frame 2, move this around, it works fine. So now on the wood, we need to convert this into a round cylinder, like a lathe. So add a mesh to curve, resample. The resample will keep it looking a consistent density the whole time if we use length mode. And the default is great there. Convert it back to a mesh. And add a screw modifier. Make sure you hit the y-axis. Now when I move this, I get this amazing effect. I'll go back to a different frame. There we go. We're getting very close now. You can hide the remesh object, and we're going to need a new object to control this object. So Shift D to duplicate. I'll name this control and delete the modifier here. So the control object is just a plain mesh. Select the control object and the cutter object. Hit Control P and pick Keep Transform to parent it. Now you can open this up and hide the cutter object. You can hide everything but the control and the wood objects. Now, when I move this around, that's great. Go to some other frame, and bingo, that is it. And now if you want to render this, you'll need to bake this out as a Alembic file. I can't figure out a way to actually render this simulation. I'm sure I'll figure that out someday. Also, if you'd like higher resolution, you can turn up the viewport and render steps on this here. Make it higher resolution mesh. If you'd like higher resolution in this direction, you can go back into your nodes and turn this to a smaller value like 0.05. Now it's an extremely dense mesh. I could turn this up more as well. There we go. That won't play in real time anymore, but it is extremely high resolution, which is nice if you're looking for something much nicer. There we go. You can animate this cutter object, hide it, replace it with a new one, do whatever to make a nice effect. And that's all. Thanks for watching this tutorial, and see you next time.